Hi, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. I thought today we could discuss the U.S. Capitol building. I have books, I have maps, I have things we can draw with. I don't know where this will go, but I've taken a little time this morning. I woke up this morning thinking about it, and I thought, well, let's look into the history of the U.S. Capitol building. The U.S. Capitol is where Congress meets, and I do have a video on the U.S. government if you're curious. But Congress is our legislative branches, and that includes the Senate and the House. So within the Capitol building are, well, let me see. I guess I could do it here. So you have the main part of the building, and that is the rotunda or the Great Rotunda. And I'll draw you a picture of what the whole building looks like. And then off of this rotunda is a big hall, and that is the Senate chamber. And we have 2 senators from each state. So that's where they meet. And then off of the rotunda here, there's like a little statutory hall where they have statues and stuff. And then there's another big chamber, and this is the House chamber. And that's where the House of Representatives meets. So that's what goes on inside of the Capitol building. That's just a quick note on that. Yeah, I have crayons. I don't know if I'll use them, but I'm ready to go if we do. So I have been watching the Ken Burns special about the Revolutionary War, and it's really interesting. It's 100,005,200 hours long. No, I'm just kidding. But it's long. I've been watching an hour a night, not even a full episode, because it's so much information. So much information. But there's a lot, of course, about George Washington, who was the first president of the United States, but he was also a great, well, sometimes great, but a very unstoppable in the way that he would keep going even in the face of defeat and hardship, military leader during the Revolutionary War. But he also was the person who, feeling that the states at that time, there wasn't as much of there wasn't a centralized government. All the, not states but colonies, were very much feeling independent. They were working together against the British, but they still felt like Virginia, we are the U.S., and Pennsylvania, we are Philadelphia, and we're the U.S., and then, Massachusetts. So the colonies were very separate still. And George Washington felt it was very important to have a centralized area where all the senators and Congress people from the states come together to discuss things. And I think like Benjamin Franklin wanted to do maybe multiple meeting places, and the Senate would go to them so that all the different states would have a place. And George Washington just felt this was not a good idea. Now I keep calling them states, but they were colonies at the time, you know what I mean. But the different colonies were kind of vying for the right to have this new capital. But like Philadelphia said, we should be we are where we signed the Declaration of Independence. This should be the capital of the country. But they were already at that time, this is pre-Civil War, of course, this is Revolutionary War times, they were already non-slave owning area. And the southern states, they didn't like that. They didn't want that. So there were a lot of political things, even way back then, about where it should be and everything. But in the end, George Washington grew up on the Potomac River, and he canoed the Potomac River. He was very familiar. And he had never traveled, really. He'd never been to Europe or anything. But he felt the Potomac River was as beautiful as any European river. And he just imagined this place being like... Actually, I have this book just because he imagined it like an old Greek or Roman city, which he'd never actually been to, but he'd seen pictures, drawings, paintings, whatever. And so he wanted to have the city placed on the Potomac River because it's so beautiful. And so that's what they did. They put it on the Potomac. And most cities are on rivers, waterways. It makes it easier. But he put it on the Potomac, and Washington, D.C. became the official permanent U.S. capital with the passage of the Residence Act of 1790. And so that was signed by Washington, and it established the Potomac site. So government functions were all around there. And he pictured it like these kind of buildings. And sure enough, that's very much how it looked. So he was like these old Roman and Gothic like architecture. And so you have to remember, one thing that Ken Burns thing really talks about is we weren't yet in a functioning country the way we are now. Some may say it's tricky right now, but and like I said, all the colonies were kind of working separately and everything. Oh yeah, and so we didn't have experts in everything yet. We had a lot of farmers, and there were doctors, but not, as many as maybe you would have in Britain. And there were city planners and architects, kind of. They were mostly amateurs, and not like you'd have in Britain. So once we got all the loyalists out of here and the British out, it was like, who are we have to work with here? But Washington found this guy, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, I think is how you say his name, a Frenchman. And he really, with him, had the vision, the visionary. He was the visionary for setting up how Washington, D.C. would be laid out and what the buildings would look like. Now, he wasn't an architect, but he was sort of the one who helped with the vision of the whole thing. Real quick, let's just look up, because I know the Capitol. Here it is, Capitol. United States Capitol, the large domed building in Washington, D.C., in which the United States Congress meets. A picture of the Capitol is often used as a symbol of the federal government of the United States. The Capitol dominates the skyline of the city of Washington. Only the Washington Monument is higher. All right, so there's that. I don't know if we'll need that book again. We might. Now, this is all in Washington, D.C., which is Washington District of Columbia. And here, let's say the Capitol is right here. And I'll try to draw you a little better situation here. Now, there's sort of this big rectangle, and in the center is the Washington Monument. So from the Capitol building, you can see the Washington Monument. And then there's a reflecting pool, and there are cherry blossom trees all along here. It's very beautiful. And off here, this is where later on they added the Lincoln Memorial, which is a sight to see, I have to say. And I feel like right in here is the Vietnam War veterans. There's the World War II. And then off of here is where the White House is. So this is kind of the setup of Washington, D.C., which is not a state, by the way. It's District of Columbia. And that's on purpose. We could talk about that. That's a whole nother video, maybe. But the thing with the Capitol building, it is up on Capitol Hill. They actually call it that. And they did that. That was a design by Washington and L'Enfant, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but that the Capitol building would be up higher from the White House as a symbol that the legislature has more power than the president by himself. So it is up on a bit of a hill overlooking. So even though the monument is taller, the Capitol building is kind of up on a hill. So that's kind of cool. And the building, it combines neoclassical architecture, but it was inspired by like those Greek and Roman buildings we were kind of looking at. So let's see. It in 1793, I think that is really when the construction began. And George Washington himself laid the cornerstone of the building. He was there during the entire construction, or not the entire, but a lot of the construction. He was showing up to like really keep an eye on it and make sure it was how he imagined it. But he died before it was completely finished. So while he laid the cornerstone, George Washington, he never actually got to, be inside it as after it was finished. Now, there was a version of it, and then we had the War of 1812, and that was a war with Britain. And one of the concerns with where they placed, where they placed the building, or actually not even the building, but the entirety of Washington, D.C. Is it not just under Washington, D.C.? No. Okay. Is it under, hold on. I should have checked this before I started. Where do you put Washington, D.C. on a thing like this? Cities. Oh, did I just see it? Hold on. No, I did not. This is Washington State. Where do you put D.C.? Sorry, guys, hold on. Washington, D.C., page 123. Okay. It must have been there. I just didn't see it. I just skipped it. 21. 120. Oh my gosh, is it miss? It's missing. Hold on. Is it this one? Maryland. Sorry. Oh my gosh, sorry. Oh no, it's missing. Maybe because I lived near there, it probably used it so much. Because I lived in Maryland and we used to go there. I probably used it so much it tore out at some point. Oh no. Anyway, I'll just tell you. The way it was set up on the Potomac River, the only concern that like some of the founders had, who were kind of not as into the idea of Washington, D.C. being the headquarters of the government, they said, well, if you put it on the Potomac River, you can get to the Potomac through I think it's the Chesapeake to the Rappahannock to the Potomac. Maybe that's right. And so big warships could come up here. Well, everybody thought, that's not. But it kind of did happen during the War of 1812. The British came up and they took over the capital, all of D.C. They burnt the Capitol down. And that was in 1812. It was repaired and reopened a couple of years later. And that is when the current Capitol building was added. Let's see here. And then they added the dome. Now the dome is how everybody knows the Capitol building. And this dome, it looks like it could be made out of stone, but it's actually a cast iron. And I think if I remember correctly, they cast it on site because cast iron is so heavy. And that is what this dome is made out of. And there's a statue on the top. I'm not going to be able, but that is called the Statue of Freedom. And it's like I think it's like a bronze looking statue. But this dome was completed in 1866. And if you ever see, pictures of the United States, this is really always part of that, because it's like, this is what, like if you watch, what was that movie with? Oh, I'm sure Tommy Lee Jones was in it, but I can't. Anyway, where they're like blowing up and they have to fight. Is that Will Smith? I don't know. Anyway, this plays a big part in it. So yeah, so like I said, the French, l'enfant, was the visionary behind it, but they ended up having a contest. Now this is back during the original version, the George Washington version, for an architect, because the U.S. at that time, like I said, we were such a young country. We didn't have a lot of outstanding architects just sitting around because you wouldn't have work. You had to be a farmer or something like that. But they ended up hiring a amateur architect whose name was William Thornton, and he designed the Capitol building, the original version. But then there was a guy, Benjamin Henry Latrobe, who was the architect who rebuilt it after the British burnt it down. And then Thomas Walker designed the Capitol dome. So multiple people were working on it. Put all the little windows in, and then there are these, there's like a big stairway up front, and I think you can still, I don't know, when I lived there, you could go in and at least tour the rotunda by yourself and maybe take tours to go even further in. So there we go. That looks pretty good. As far as I know, every modern president, and you could even say George Washington because he laid the cornerstone, but they've all been inside of the Capitol building. They regularly go there for inaugurations. They do the State of the Union address, which I did a video on one time if you're curious. And then there's sometimes like memorial services and things there. The early presidents, like Washington and Adams and Jefferson, they lived here before it was fully complete, but they definitely would have been inside. In fact, Adams, when he first got to DC, it was like a mud pit. The whole thing was just mud. The White House had like mud floors. And he wrote to his wife, Abigail. And their letters are what we know a lot of things about early times, because they wrote very good, prolific letters to each other. But he said something like, I forget, but it was saying like, it's livable. Come here. And then when she went, she was pretty disgusted because it was just a mess. But one thing she thought really wasn't great was that when they were building all these things, they had hired slave owners, paid them to use their slaves to do the work. So there were some free black men working and then other free men, but there were also slave labor who did not get paid, but their owners were paid. So she found that distasteful. But I was thinking about it, and this is to be clear, slavery is awful and terrible. But all these giant cities you think of throughout Europe used slave, like these things couldn't be built if it weren't on the backs of slaves. who didn't get any kind of anything for what they did. And that is true even like in so many, like in Mexican, like Mayan temples. When I've been to those, they talk about how they had slave labor. Egypt had slave labor. All of Greece, and they all used slave labor. And so did the U.S. Capitol. And so did the U.S., all of D.C. So that's interesting in a land of freedom. What else are we talking about here? The original dome, before they put this cast iron one in, it was a copper dome. And after it was burnt down, they removed the copper dome, because it was burnt down to rebuild. But then the copper dome looked too small. So that's why they designed this much bigger dome. And the workers, the dome was being constructed during the Civil War. So there were battles going on nearby, but the workers kept working on the dome during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln insisted construction continue as a sign that the country was holding together. Now, inside of the dome, there's a painting called I don't know, I forget. I can't remember, but it shows George Washington, and he's painted like a Roman god. And some people at the time were kind of like shocked by this, like, what are we doing? But it's a beautiful painting, and the figures around him represent the ideas of liberty, victory, science, war, agriculture. So it's really beautiful to see, and you can go in there and tour that. I think if it's still open, I don't know. And the painting is so large that they had artists lie on their backs, and they painted it like how they did the Sistine Chapel. And then around the dome, it looks like there's carved stone, but it's actually all these like paintings that are painted just in grayscale. So it looks like sculpture. It's pretty cool. And that tells the U.S. history, like in a spiral. It starts with early exploration and goes around. It's cool. Oh yeah, and when you're inside the Capitol building, there are like these acoustic quirks. So in certain spots, you can whisper, and the person on the other side can hear it. I couldn't really get that to work, but because I think there is that. I think they have a spot inside. Maybe I'm thinking of somewhere else, but I think it was in the Capitol building where you could whisper and they'd say you can hear it. I don't know. Now I'm not sure it was the Capitol. I may have been somewhere else, but so yeah, it's pretty cool. What else do we need to talk about it? Well, there have been some, this might get touchy, but there have been some major, incidences, including the British invasion in it was a war of 1812, but the British invaded in 1814, and they burned the Capitol down. They damaged it seriously enough that they had to rebuild it. In 1915, a German sympathizer planted dynamite in the Senate reception room, and it exploded during the night. In 1954, these 4 Puerto Rican nationalists who wanted Puerto Rican independence fired 30 shots inside of the House chamber, and they wounded 5 congressmen. So over here is the Senate, over here is the House chamber. And then there was a group called the Weather Underground, and they were anti-Vietnam and Nixon's policies in Vietnam. And they put a bomb somewhere in the Capitol. I'm not sure where that one was. They're like these little freezes, I think they're called here, that are kind of like the Roman ones I was showing you. In 1983, there was another bomb that exploded in the Senate wing, and a group who claimed to be protesting against involvement in Lebanon and Grenada, did that bomb. So, there have been quite a few, and not, well, kind of. I guess over how much time? It hasn't really been that much, I guess. But then in 1998, there was another Capitol shooting, and that was a guy who just seemed to he didn't have a point of view as much as just distrust of the federal government. He shot and killed 2 police officers, U.S. Capitol Police, at a checkpoint outside. And then we come to January 6th of 2021, and that was, I'm sure most of us remember or know, so I won't go into too much detail, but there was 10,000 protesters who believed the U.S. election had been stolen from then President Donald Trump, who were at I don't know how much to go into this because I don't want people to feel like, but we all know, right? Okay, so they were at the rally with Trump, and anyway, so mob mentality is a real thing, and sometimes mobs do things I stay out of. If large groups of people start pushing a certain way, I think it's best to get the heck out, because basically a mob of 10,000 people ended up going over to the Capitol building and stormed the Capitol. So they were trying to stop the certification of the election of Joe Biden, and they wanted especially Mike Pence to not certify it. So that was, that. And one protester, I don't even know how to use, I don't know what language to use, because no matter what I say, somebody in the comments is going to say I'm saying the wrong thing. But one person who was going into the Capitol illegally was shot and killed, but also many Capitol police officers were injured or killed or died in the days following. One died of stroke and some of suicide. So that happened. But that was really the worst thing that's ever happened to Washington, D.C., honestly, but the Capitol. And then after that, there was a car attack in 2021 that was outside of the Capitol when a man drove into a barricade and he killed a Capitol police officer. He seemed to have mental health problems. And then when Donald Trump was sworn into office, a lot of, like 1,500 of the people who stormed the Capitol were found, were charged for that, but they were pardoned at the beginning of this term. That's just true. I don't know. It's just true. Okay. So, trying to think what else there is about it. No, it's pretty interesting building. What color is this one say? Green. Okay. Put some grass around it. So it's mostly a white building. Actually, there's parking lot out here. And a lot of times, if you're going to go to a protest in Washington, D.C., oftentimes you'll start at the Capitol building and then work your way around. And, you protest on this area often. They'll have stages set up. And it's totally legal to protest and totally legal to have your voice be heard. That's freedom of speech. But breaking into buildings and stuff isn't the same thing. All right. So I guess that's all. I have to say. What color is this? Earth brown. Earth brown. All right. Let's pretend like it's olden days and this is a dirt front on it. It's kind of earth brown, and you have horse and buggies pulling up. But a lot of people back in the revolutionary times, like I said, they wanted the Capitol to be all these different places, or they didn't want to put funds towards it or whatever. But there was something about George Washington, even though he wasn't technically like a politician, but he really wanted this. He was the driving force behind Washington, D.C. and the Capitol building. And he would show up at meetings, and he was very tall and commanding. And he wouldn't write letters to people like most people did saying, you need to help me. He would always go in person. And there was something about, apparently from people talking about it in letters, there was something about George Washington's and the way he carried himself that made people go, yeah, okay, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. He was also a slave owner, as a note. But he just had a way about him, I guess, that really led people to follow him. And I do think that you hate to say that one man influenced a country too much, like to give too much credit to any one person. But there is no doubt that George Washington leading the armies during the Revolution, a lot of times they were like camped at these waiting for battles. They would just like camp up at these different places for years, and they would be starving and they would be freezing, and people didn't even always know what or why they were fighting there, and they'd sneak off back to their colony. And he had to kind of consistently rouse the troops to stay and to keep fighting for freedom, and he managed to do it. It's crazy. And then when he decided to build this, there were very intelligent people who were against it, were against Washington, D.C. being in one location on the Rappahannock or the Potomac River. But he just kind of made it happen. And for a while they talked about calling it Washingtonopolis. I forget. But he kept saying, no, you can't name it after me. I'm sure he really did want it named after him. But I think it wasn't until after he died that they said, well, let's name it Washington. I think that was later after he died. But, there's really no other name that would have worked. All right, well, I have a doctor's appointment this morning, so I have to go. But I just thought this would be an interesting subject, so I hope you enjoyed it. It is beautiful there in DC. Okay. I'm sure I left out a lot of things, but the other thing, there are some hidden tunnels underneath the Capitol building. It's mostly, I think, so that they can get around easily without going through the public parts, but I don't really know. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't do much work looking at that.